To disassemble, repair and assemble your Samsung Galaxy Mega, you will need a small Phillips and bladed screwdriver and a plastic separation tool. You can use a guitar pick, a plastic spudger, plastic knife or your thumbnail. If you're going to replace the screen or the screen frame, you need to use a sucker tool. This is from a windscreen phone mount. You could use a sat-nav or maybe a fridge one. You also need to use a heat source. This is a hot air heat gun. We could use a fan heater or a hairdryer. Make sure the device is shut down. Remove the battery cover. And the battery, which contains the NFC antenna and the micro SIM and SD card. Using a small Phillips screwdriver, undo these 6 silver screws. If you are replacing the loudspeaker, these are the only screws you will need to remove. Now this speaker housing can be unclipped using a plastic tool. Insert it between the USB port and the speaker housing and lift that away. These 2 contacts are for the loudspeaker, moisture indicator. This air vent is for the loudspeaker, and these 2 contacts are for the 3G GSM antenna. Now undo the rest of the screws. These are all the same size, so don't worry about getting them mixed up. You can skip this or any other stage by clicking next in the top corner. To separate the rear housing, insert a plastic tool or your thumbnail at the bottom here and slide it around the outside edge, releasing the clips as you go around, which I've marked in white. If you can't use your thumbnail, use a plastic tool. Keep sliding it around the outside. Once all the clips have been released, the rear housing will lift away nice and easy. Here is the antenna connection for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, your GPS antenna, infrared blaster lens. If you need to replace the camera lens, you can bend these 2 tabs up and that will release and let you replace the lens. Here is another moisture indicator and the 4G antenna connection, which can be seen from the back. If you need to remove or replace your headphone socket, start by disconnecting the flex. Then lift the socket away and you can fit your replacement. If your replacement doesn't come with this rubber gasket, you'll need to exchange this over to your new one. This also contains the notification LED. If you're having problems with the micro USB socket or the main microphone, you can replace this circuit board. Start by disconnecting the flex cable for the home and touch keys and the main cable for the USB and microphone. Now gently and carefully unplug the 3G GSM antenna flex. And using a thin screwdriver, gently lift the board away. If you're replacing it, don't worry too much about any damage. But if you're exchanging this over to a new screen, then carefully lift it away. You can use some heat to help soften the adhesive. If you're going to reuse the double-sided tape, then make sure it sits down nice and flat. This is the main voice microphone, and the sound enters that small hole and your micro USB port. To remove the earpiece, proximity and gesture sensor and your forward facing camera, undo this single black screw. There's only 2 screws this size, so you can't get them mixed up. Carefully lift the metal clip away from the frame. And put that aside. And disconnect the front facing camera. And put that aside. Unplug the gesture and proximity sensor and earpiece, held in with double-sided tape. If you need to reuse this, then carefully lift that away from the casing. And if you need to reuse the earpiece, then gently lift that away from the double-sided tape. If the tape comes away, then try and put it back on nice and flat. This is the gesture and proximity sensor, which works in conjunction with this infrared LED. This is the infrared blaster. If you have a replacement, it may not come with the plastic spacer, so you'll need to remove this plastic spacer from your old flex. Again, you can use some heat to make this a little bit easier. And when you place it onto your new flex, make sure you put it round this way and bring the gesture and proximity sensor down and make sure that's stuck down in place. To remove the mainboard, start by disconnecting this antenna flex cable. Gently and carefully lift that up, and if you're replacing the screen and frame together, lift that away from the housing. Disconnect the volume switches. This is the main display connector. Undo this single screw. This is the same size as the other black screw. And now we can lift the mainboard away. Make sure the flex cables and the camera are completely free. Here is the contact for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and your GPS. The micro SD and SIM tray can be replaced by heating up all these solder contacts at the same time using a hot air soldering iron. Here is the LED flash. And this contacts for the 4G antenna. Next to this antenna connection is a 3G GSM test port. This is a backup battery that keeps the time and date while you change the main battery. These two contacts are for the power switch, and these two are for the vibrating motor. If you're having problems with the main camera, you can remove from the main board and fit your replacement. And this is the secondary microphone, which is used for background noise suppression. To remove the vibrating motor, lift this circuit away from the casing. Using a small screwdriver or a pointed tool, lever this up. That's held on with double-sided tape. If you're having problems with your power switch, this is easily replaced by lifting away from the casing. If you're going to reuse this with a new screen frame, then carefully lift it away and exchange it over to your new screen. The same with the volume switches. Lift them away from the casing. And then place them into your new screen frame. This flex connection is for the digitizer, which is bonded to the display. You may have to remove and exchange this microphone gasket over to a new screen frame. If your replacement screen doesn't come with this notification LED diffuser, you can remove that and place it into your new one. This is the main voice microphone gasket, which again you may need to remove and exchange over to your new screen frame. When you put it back, make sure this dust net is sitting nicely in place. If you need to replace the screen frame or bezel, or you're having problems with the home and touch keys, we need to separate the display from the front housing. To do this, place a sucker tool on the screen near the home key and switch on your heat source. Try and get the air temperature to between 60 and 70 degrees C. Wear some gloves so you don't burn your hands. Get the screen nice and hot and try and lift the screen away from the housing. Take it nice and slow and the adhesive will slowly separate. Don't pull too hard or you'll damage the home and touch key flex. Keep lifting it away, but don't rush or there's a risk of damage in the display. Be careful when you come to the flex cable. Make sure you're not putting any stress or strain on this flex cable as you lift the back away. You might have to give it a little push to one side to help it through the frame. Once that's free, keep lifting it away. Now switch off your heat source. If you intend to reuse the original screen frame, then it might be possible to reuse the original adhesive. Make sure it's sitting down nice and flat. And make sure there are no bumps or lumps that will stop the screen from sitting down in place. If you find the adhesive has been stretched, then you can cut a small piece away and then it will sit down nice and flat. To remove or replace the home and touch key flex, start by removing the home button. If you want to reuse this home flex in a new frame, then using a small screwdriver, carefully lift the switch away from the housing. Come round to the other side and feed that through the frame. The reason the screen is quite easy to lift away is there's no adhesive in the centre, as it has a plastic sheet in between. If you're replacing the screen frame, you may need to remove and exchange this speaker grill over to your new frame. If you cannot reuse the existing double-sided tape, then you need to replace it with some fresh mobile phone tape. This is extremely sticky and flexible compared to normal household tape, and it's quite easy to find online. If you don't have any tape, you could use some adhesive like this Evo Stick Serious Glue. Don't use too much, and apply a small amount around the edges where the double-sided tape would normally go. The LCD display is bonded to the digitizer, which connects through this flex cable around to the front, and the glass screen is bonded to the digitizer using this clear optical adhesive. This can be quite tricky to work with and makes it a little bit difficult trying to separate the glass from the display. One of the methods for doing this uses this thin, strong wire and heating the screen up to about 60 or 70 degrees C, and then cutting through between the glass and the digitizer, and then replacing the glass screen. If optical adhesive isn't used, you'll have an air gap which shows an oil slick effect when you press on the glass. To reassemble, start by placing the home and touch key flex into the casing. Making sure that these small pins line up with the holes in the flex. Once you're happy that that's down in place, take the home button and make sure that the small pins locate on the tabs on the home key. Now we can replace the display. Feed the flex cable through into the front housing, As you bring it down, make sure the flex is not trapped and that the home button is locating and working correctly. Make sure the speaker grill lines up and give it a gentle push down around the edges. Double check the home button is working okay, and make sure that the glass behind the camera and the proximity sensor is nice and clean. Replace the secondary microphone gasket. Now replace the vibrating motor. Making sure you line up the small pin with the holes in the circuit. Now we can replace the volume switches. Making sure that the circuit lines up with the cutout in the centre. And make sure the small pin lines up with the hole in the circuit. Now replace the power switch. Again, making sure the small pins in the housing line up with the circuit. Try and remove any finger grease from these gold contacts. Now we can replace the mainboard. As you bring it down in place, make sure that the flex cables are not trapped. And once you're satisfied it's sitting down okay, replace that single black screw. Now reconnect the main screen connector. Replace the front-facing camera and plug that in. Now the earpiece and proximity sensor. Make sure this proximity sensor goes all the way down towards the screen. If it's not sitting down fully, the screen will go blank during voice calls. Now you can replace your headphone socket. Now we can replace the micro USB and microphone board. Make sure that when you place it on, it goes over the top of that small flex cable, and when it's lined up, plug it back in. Reconnect the volume switches and the home and touch key flicks. Make sure these sprung connectors are high enough to make contact with the loudspeaker contacts, and these are high enough for the 3G GSM antenna contacts. Now replace the 3G GSM antenna cable. This can be a little bit tricky. Just keep moving it around until you feel it line up and snap into place. Make sure that sits down into the groove. And if you have trouble plugging this end in, keep moving it around. You may have to bend the cable slightly. And make sure you feel it snap into place. Make sure the cable's pushed all the way down into the groove. Now replace the clip that holds the front camera and proximity sensor in place. Replace that single black screw. A final check to make sure everything's plugged in and sitting down. Now replace the rear housing. Keep squeezing around the outside edge until you feel all the clips snap into place. Now replace the speaker assembly, making sure you feel it snap on each side. Replace all the silver screws, and don't do these up too tight. Finger tight is just fine. Now insert your SIM and micro SD card, the battery, and finally the battery cover. And you now have a fully repaired Samsung Galaxy Mega. After assembly, it's a good idea to test all the functions and features are working okay. If you go to the phone dial pad and enter *#0*# that brings up a test menu, and this tests that all the pixels are working on the screen. As for the earpiece, vibrating module, 2-stage dimmer. This is your main camera. This tests all the sensors are working correctly. This is the proximity sensor test. This is the gyro self-test. This one tests the electronic compass is working okay. If this fails, try the test again away from any electrical interference. This is the gyro self-test. Make sure you hold the phone still when you perform that test. You need to tap this return key twice to come back to the main menu. This is for testing the touch screen is working okay. Sometimes performing this test can help with calibration problems. I had an issue with a new screen, and after performing this test it was working okay. This checks the TSP hovering, so you can hover over the screen with anything you want. This sends the phone to sleep, and you need to wake it up pressing the power button. This is the loudspeaker, and this one is for testing all the sub keys, so the 3 keys at the bottom, and the volume up and down, and the power switch. This one tests the front camera. And this one tests the notification LED, is showing all the colours. This one's for testing the infrared blaster is working. If you look at it through a camera and press one of the buttons, you'll see it flashing. This one's for testing the earpiece to low frequency. And finally, we have a black screen test. This keeps the backlight on, but blanks the screen out. You can just make out a slight bit of light from the backlight. This will make any dead pixels show up. And now push the back key a few times to bring you back to the normal screen. Thanks for watching. Please give a thumbs up, and I'll do my best to make some more.